Podcast. Again, this is the Web Platform Podcast, episode number 45. We are live. And today we're going to be talking about different ways to authenticate, and in particular, SSO, OpenID, OAuth 3, and Anvil Connect, which is an interesting project in Node.js. So on our panel today we have aj-oneal.
Yo, 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 coming at you live from Provo, rainy Provo.
And Niemeir.
Morning, everybody.
And our guest today is Christian Smith. You guys have heard him on the show. He's been doing a lot of Angular and Node stuff in the past. He hosted several episodes with us, and now he's back to have his own little show here. So, Christian, would you like to tell us a little bit about what's going on today?
What's going on today? The sun's shining. It's not rainy, so that's good. A few clouds in the sky. Yeah, I'm just here to help you guys understand identity and auth stuff.
Very cool. So tell us a little bit about the work you've been doing to make it easier for developers to do all this stuff.
Yeah, so a couple of years ago, I was working on a startup idea and kept running into all these crazy auth use cases, and it just seemed like all I was doing was rewriting auth code over and over and over again. And so it kind of got this idea that we could abstract it all and generalize it and make it useful to everybody. So I started working on building an authorization server, and I didn't really know what the hell I was doing at first, and neither did anyone else that I was working for or working with or talking to. We were all just kind of fumbling along. So we went through a few different iterations of this until finally we discovered OpenID Connect, and realized that it kind of filled in a lot of the blanks that we were missing and trying to replicate. So we started working on Anvil Connect. That's what we're calling it, and it's a standalone auth server that you can use to authenticate users and protect your APIs. Right now we have some users in production, so it's getting some love, starting to pick up a little traction, and yeah, that's about it.
So this would be a question for everybody, though, but since I'm kind of, I've done some authentication stuff, but I'm not so familiar with the innards of everything. I see a lot of things like OpenID Connect, OAuth. What are the differences between these types of models?
So OpenID Connect is actually a really unfortunate name for a great protocol. For example, a lot of developers write it off because they think OpenID, they think of it as some kind of failed protocol that didn't really get any traction, and that's accurate. OpenID was out there for a while, and then it kind of just, it's got some great ideas in it, but it didn't really take off and become this universal thing that they were hoping for. OpenID Connect is actually very different from old school OpenID. In fact, it's actually OAuth. It's built on OAuth. I think they call it a profile of OAuth 2. And so it uses these well-known and easy-to-use OAuth 2 flows for authentication, and then it adds some really important stuff that OAuth 2 lacks, like signatures. And to understand why that's important, you have to know the difference between authentication and authorization. Authentication is about verifying identity. It answers the question, who is this? Who am I? Authorization, on the other hand, answers the question, what can I do? It's about permission. So OAuth is a misunderstood protocol. It's not actually about authentication, even though people use it for that. It's really an authorization protocol. And the problem that it solves is, how do we delegate access to a third party in such a way that the user doesn't have to share their password? So OAuth, you go through this flow, and you have to sign in. You have to be authenticated with the provider before you can complete the OAuth flow.
So
there
provider
is
means like Facebook or Google or
exactly,
Yahoo.
exactly, yeah. So you're authenticating with Google, and the third party can rely on the fact that you've authenticated with Google, so people rely on that for authentication.
Third party
But
being like Imgur or
yeah, like if
app.
you build an app and you want to sign in with Facebook, you're the third party. So you can't really rely on Facebook on the access token that they give you, for example. That's not really a strong assurance of identity. It doesn't really tell you who this person is. So that's the problem that OpenID Connect solves. It takes these OAuth flows and adds really strong authentication features on top of them. And in fact, OpenID Connect was developed by Google, Microsoft, Facebook, Deutsche Telekom, a handful of others, along with the OpenID Foundation. And when you're using Google's apps today, their auth is actually being handled by OpenID Connect. Does that help?
Yeah, that helps me. I hadn't heard much about OpenID Connect as of yet.
Yeah, same here.
So
It's interesting though. Like, I'm sorry. Go ahead, AJ.
I was just gonna say, and Nick had some points to bring up, like why any of these at all.
Yeah, I mean, basically, to me, these aren't the alternative of doing one-off solutions. But we've that's predetermined to be a bad idea, and we can't like keep handing out passwords to everybody and making everyone do this on its own. It's kind of either we go with open web technologies like OpenID Connect, or we go with proprietary solutions. Either way, we're headed towards single sign-on. It's kind of necessary. So why use OpenID Connect over some of the more proprietary stuff?
Oh, why use it?
Yeah, over a proprietary single sign-on.
I think probably the best answer is most of the proprietary ones suck.
But what's the business case reason why they suck?
Well,
I guess is what we're getting at.
So like they tend to be really clunky. Like SAML uses XML, where OpenID Connect uses JSON. Stuff like CAS that's in the halls of antiquity. I think some people still actually use that, and it's worth exploring the question of what is single sign-on too. Like a lot of people think that, oh, you sign in with Facebook and you have 3 different apps that sign in with Facebook. That's single sign-on. So there's a problem of definition too, because when other people think single sign-on, we think of single sign-on in the sense of CAS. For example, you're really thinking about shared sessions or monitoring the session state on your authorization server. So, for example, when you sign into Gmail and then you navigate to YouTube, you're already signed in to YouTube because you signed into Gmail and they're using the same auth service. When you sign out of YouTube, then you'll also be signed out of Gmail when you navigate back there, and you'll have to sign back in. That's a distinction that's often lost when we're talking about single sign-on, not just sharing user accounts.
So I also want to bring up that there's a productivity cost as well. If you're using OAuth 2 is what I'm most familiar with, and I'm working on a spec for OAuth 3. If you're using OAuth 2, then you can find a server written in just about any language, and you can find clients written in just about any language. So there are variations between those, like the Facebook client is not compatible with the GitHub client, like even though technically they should be, in reality there are variations in the OAuth 2 implementations. However, if your implementation is more similar to Facebook or more similar to GitHub or more similar to Instagram, you can take that code that's open source on GitHub, copy and paste in a couple places to put your brand in there, and then when you've got a .NET developer that wants to authenticate against you, you have an almost zero cost of getting them up and running and getting people to integrate with you without it costing them their resources.
Yeah, that's a really good point. OpenID Connect actually, not to pump that spec, but I've spent a lot of time with it, and I think it takes interoperability a bit further than OAuth, where where the spec is a little more well-defined and a little less vague. OAuth left, especially OAuth 2, left a whole bunch of stuff kind of open to interpretation.
Yeah.
OpenID Connect is less so, and so if you find a client for OpenID Connect that's, say, Java, and you've done a compliant implementation, they even have a set of interoperability tests for OpenID Connect. So implementers can register their server and run it against these interop tests and see how does it stack up. So you're more likely with OpenID Connect to have general interoperability between different languages and different client implementations and everything else, assuming that people are doing it right, which is a big assumption.
Yeah.
So for Anvil Connect, right? For Anvil Connect, you've taken a lot of these ideas and you've designed like a Node backend, right? And I love the idea that you've used JavaScript because of the ubiquity of it. But I know you talked about doing it in Go and a lot of other different things in the past. So how does your server help businesses or developers in those businesses kind of push these like for OpenID? I'm assuming you're using OpenID Connect. Am I correct?
Yeah. It does implement both OAuth and OpenID Connect. So basically any client code that complies with those specs should be able to work with it. The real problem that we're solving, auth is such a crazy problem. It's like an iceberg. The only thing that you see is the button that says sign in with Facebook or whatever, and it seems so easy. And developers aren't in the business of writing auth code. They have other stuff to ship, so there's a big motivation to do the simplest thing possible that I can do right now. And this is crazy easy when you just have one application or you just have one method of authentication. There are tons of libraries out there, and a lot, they're really good, well-written code. But the problem with libraries, they're inherently limiting. Like, what happens when you have more than one app and you want to share user accounts? What happens when you want to offer users several different ways that they can sign in, several different providers? Now you have this many-to-many problem.
And not just in one aspect, but also in the aspect of the accounts that one user manages. So Facebook, Google, all of the enterprise-level authentication schemes, you end up managing multiple business accounts, multiple personal accounts, multiple, maybe you have marketing access to an account. And that is something that no open source framework that I've seen answers that question of how do I scale as I'm integrating with future services that I'll provide in my own app.
Right, and that's among the set of problems that you face. And so what we're really trying to get at with Anvil Connect is a broker between all these different apps and services and identity providers and OAuth APIs and stuff like that. So ideally, as a developer, you should be able to start your project by you're going to throw a database on a server, then you're going to throw an auth server up there, and then you're going to start building against those things. And maybe you only use like 2 features of the auth server when you first get started, but as you grow and as you develop, it's already there, and you don't have to rewrite everything to make this stuff work. Like if you build around a library, there's a big problem because it sort of incentivizes you to have a monolithic architecture and make one great big thing. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you guys remember what happened to Twitter, right? They had this famously enormous Rails app. There were like 200 engineers working on this, and they got so big that nobody could trace a problem all the way through this app. I mean, they just couldn't manage it anymore. And that probably would have killed Twitter, except that they had, gazillions of dollars in venture capital, and they could afford to rewrite everything from scratch, which is, at that size, is very, very hard to do. And they used a service-oriented architecture and broke things up into little tiny pieces, and they had this modularity that made things work at that size with all the different use cases that they're handling. And I kind of have this belief that you shouldn't have to go through that kind of growing pain. An auth server is kind of like an architectural design pattern that makes a lot of these things possible. It makes it possible to build smaller services that might be written in different languages that play well together, and to write different apps for different platforms, and you still get SSO, and you're still using the same user accounts. It kind of dries up your architecture, and eliminates a bunch of different headaches before you even have them, which is good, because usually when people run into this stuff, it's at a time that they can't really afford to deal with it and rewrite all their crap. So, yeah, does that answer the question, Erik?
Well, I mean, does your framework actually, I should say, your server, does it actually solve some of these issues that, I mean, AJ had said that, and correct me if I'm wrong, AJ, that no framework or library has done this sort of, I forgot what you had said.
I said I haven't seen an open source framework that properly abstracts, and I haven't looked into Anvil Connect.
Right.
I just found out about it a few days ago, but I haven't seen an open source library that correctly pulls apart the pieces in the right way. That, because when you start your app, you just want username and password, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you can do that with OAuth 2, right? Like, you can just implement only the resource owner password strategy and get back a token, which, and this, now we have the JWT standard, which is that what Anvil Connect uses?
It is. It's what OpenID Connect defines for these things.
Yeah, so you need that JWT because it gives you some metadata. It really helps provide the correct layer of abstraction. But so you have authentication, you have authorization, and then you potentially have accounts as well that are all kind of part of this thing that we want. And you can implement at the beginning, just one strategy and kind of grow out from there. But I haven't seen a framework that makes it easy to get started simply and then expand in, that allows you to grow in that space where you get the right abstractions. That's what I was saying.
Okay. So I think that's what I wanted to understand was, does Anvil solve any of these problems? And I have a guess, knowing Christian, that it probably solves one of those problems, probably the actual
I think
authentication piece, right?
It solves several of those problems. When you stand up an Anvil instance, you are not only getting kind of a broker for signing in with different providers, but you're also now an identity provider and an OAuth provider yourself. So if you want to put a bunch of API services up and make it so that people have to register their app and get tokens before they can use your APIs, Anvil supports that. That's what it does.
So
I think that's good because too many frameworks are unopinionated, and that's baloney because you can't be unopinionated. You can't write it. All code is opinionated, otherwise it's not code. Like, the OAuth 2 framework is unopinionated. It provides nothing that's concrete. That's unopinionated, right? But people don't want unopinionated. They want something that's going to work and be extensible. And it sounds like Anvil Connect is a service-oriented architecture that you can put up somewhere, and I'm guessing you can get your token back from that service, and then use it against the API server separately. Is that how it works?
Exactly. That's exactly how it works. And we're actually using JSON Web Tokens for access tokens in Anvil 2. That's not part of OpenID Connect. It's really that set of specs, JSON Web Tokens, JSON Web Signatures, JSON Web Algorithms. They have a whole bunch of them, JW somethings, that work together. It's really, I think it's an incredible advance. And to understand how these work and why they're important and everything, you kind of have to take a step back and understand the concept of claims-based identity. This is what OpenID was all about. It's what OpenID Connect adds on to OAuth. And the best way to understand it is to take an analogy, like a driver's license, right? You go to the Department of Motor Vehicles and they issue a driver's license, and on that driver's license there are a bunch of claims and assertions about the bearer of the license, about the person that has this license. And the license is made in such a way that it's sufficiently hard to replicate so that you can rely on it. You can say, yep, this came from the state of wherever. So when you get stopped by a police officer, they can look at this. They can look at the claims that are made on this driver's license, like you know, do you have to wear glasses to drive, or what's your age, or you know, where do you live? When does your license expire? It can look at these claims. The police officer can look at these claims and know if your license is valid or if you're doing something you shouldn't be. Another example would be when a college student goes to a bar and the bouncer says, "Show me your license." They can look at the license, see that it actually came from, say, the state of Massachusetts, and look at the age, and because they trust that this came from the state of Massachusetts, they can trust that the age is correct. They don't have to make a phone call and say, hey, is Billy Bob old enough to get into the bar and drink? So to bring that analogy back to our domain, Anvil Connect acts like a Department of Motor Vehicles issuing licenses in the form of ID tokens and access tokens. And so I think we started out talking about the access token and API thing. We're also using JOTs for access tokens, and there's some really cool things about this. Like when you send an access token to some API, in, let's say you have a big distributed system and your architecture is services, and you know, so you want them to be working independently and separately. So when your API service gets this token, because we're using signed JSON web tokens, it can verify the signature on that token using a public key from the server, and then it can decode the token and trust whatever claims are embedded in the token.
So can I interject just for a second to explain JWT
Sure.
to touch? So
yeah.
Those of you that don't know, JWT is it's 3 sets of base 64 encoded JSON. So the first set says what the algorithm was used for the encoding mechanism. The second set is usually some details like when the expire time is, what the user ID is, a few things like that. And then the third is the signature that we're talking about. So the first set tells how to know what the signature is. It signs against that base 64 encoded string, and that is, so it's 3 base 64 segments separated by periods, and that's what we mean when we say JWT. It's a token, but instead of being a random identifier, it's actually encoded information with a signature at the end.
Good explanation.
Excellent.
So how does this token-based, claims-oriented architecture improve performance?
That's a really good
sessions.
question. So yeah, there's no sessions. So not only are there no sessions, but like if you're an API service and you get this JOT token, you don't have to make a round trip to the auth server to check on the token and say, hey, you know, who does this token belong to? What's the user ID for this token, or what permissions do they have? All of that information can be embedded right in the token, and because it's CPU bound now by you know, verifying a signature instead of I/O bound by making a round trip, you're measuring in nanoseconds rather than tens and depending on the network, maybe hundreds of milliseconds.
Well, why aren't we doing this before?
Well, I don't know, but if you're considering implementing an authentication system, cookie sessions are definitely not the way to go. There are so many problems with them, security-wise, performance-wise, with name, not DNS, but with the ideas around subdomains and domains and how they'll get transferred and that kind of stuff. And the JWT really hits the mark. And one other thing is there's a shared secret on each one of those service-oriented architectures. So your API server, your authentication server, your images server, whatever servers you do have this shared secret that helps verify those signatures. So that's where you still do have, your authentication without hitting the database, because every service you're spinning up has that shared secret on it that can verify the token.
We're actually not even using a shared secret. We're using public and private keys. So it uses RSA.
Okay, yeah.
And the auth server publishes the public key in the form of another JW thing. It's a JWK, JSON web key. So it takes a PEM and translates it into this JSON structure representing the RSA key. And the client, you don't even have to configure it or share the secret. The client can just make a request to the auth server, get this JSON back, and use that as a public key to verify the signature. So it obviously gets signed with the private key on the auth server.
So let me play devil's advocate here for just 1 second. So I have this, and I'm a hacker. How hackable is this, right? Because cookies, obviously, yes, very hackable. So where would I even begin to think about hacking this?
So can I take that one?
Yeah,
go for it.
Yeah.
All right. So there's two components here. There's public information and private information. So the JWT spec, as I understand it, is mostly focused on information that it's okay to be public, right? So you have your JSON object that has your user ID, the expire time, etc. And so if you want to discover information, JWT in itself does not protect against that. So as a hacker, you can just decode the base 64, you'll have the JSON, you can see whatever information the token contains. Now you could have a field in the token that is then AES encrypted or RSA encrypted as well if you wanted to go that route. But that's, as far as I understand, having that kind of field in there isn't part of the spec. The signature is by all intents and purposes impossible to break. The only kind of vulnerability that we've ever seen that could allow you to break a signature would be Heartbleed.
And the human factor.
Oh yeah, and the human factor. Yeah, you can always walk up to somebody's desk, pull the sticky note off their monitor, log in with that password, and then get into the server.
So to protect against these sort of hacks, what would you do on a server, or what would you do in Anvil Connect?
That's a really good question on Anvil Connect.
Curveball.
Yeah, we have. I don't think we've had anybody full time just beating the hell out of this thing trying to break it. And so actually, I'm trying to find some people that can help us do that. If anyone's interested, please look me up and let's talk about it. Because this is a complicated set of things, and there's a million things that could go wrong. But there's also this notion. I think you need to have people actively researching this stuff all the time. You remember Erik, Gary McGraw, I think, was on the show, and he made a comment to the effect that you can never prove that something is secure. You can only prove that it's not insecure according to what vulnerabilities you actually know about. So the potential to break these things is as infinite as they are complex.
To me, security, when you're talking about computer security, it's a simple matter of you're making sure that technically your stack is your strong links and your humans are your weak links, right? Because your security really always is going, if your system is implemented properly, your humans are always going to be your weakest link, and they're going to be the weakest link by 100,000 times. And that's what you want, is you want to make sure that as far as the technology goes, the technology is not an attack vector. If I was going to spend 65 million years harvesting quantum computers to break your signature versus if I was going to spend a couple $1,000 hiring a couple people to do a setup to get into your office, you want the human attack vector to be the desirable attack vector.
Yeah, we had Chris Hagnedy from socialengineer.org on not too long ago, and I love it. He has a podcast on all of this. I love that, talking about the social engineering and the human factor of it. It's like something you can't really take care of in the tech piece, but it's something that all developers should be educated on because it happens every day.
Yeah, like let's say you want a secure system. You can ask your users to change their 12-digit random passwords every 6 weeks and have your IT guy so fed up with having to answer support calls all day long that he just starts granting them without properly identifying people.
Not that that's happened ever. I've never seen that. So what about this? The OAuth 3? Did we talk about that at all?
So basically, I mean, it sounds like OpenID Connect and OAuth 3 are pretty similar. I just was fed up with. I mean, I've got the same problem that Christian has, where I just really. I've spent so much time redoing authentication and authorization in accounts, and I see these problems in OAuth 2, so I was like, well, I'm just going to buy the domain, see if it's available. The domain was available, so I bought OAuth3.org, and I set up, the GitHub name was available, so I grabbed it, and then I just started writing. I mean, right now it's just more casual notes than a hard spec, but I'm trying to get to that point of solving the problems that we have with interoperability, and one focus that I feel is different from what OpenID Connect sounds like, and Christian, correct me or provide some more insight if you've got it, but one of my focuses with OAuth 3 is peer-oriented architecture. So we now live in an age where everybody has an always-on internet connection in their home, in America at least, and we can start to move back towards the original internet. For so long, we've relied on Facebook and YouTube and all of these services to store our data, and it's a little bit shady because you don't know what happens with that data, and you don't know like where it is. And most importantly, aside from the tinfoil hat stuff, is what if I want to get it? Like, how do I find an old Facebook post? How do I find an old Instagram photo? And we don't have a solution for that. What we need to be moving towards is a peer system where we're starting to use our own computers as the primary source for our data, and using things like Facebook and YouTube more as like backups that have some nice features of being accessible in a really redundant way. But we need to start moving towards this peer-oriented internet, and reaping the benefits of that are becoming available. So OAuth 3 is trying to answer the questions of how do I automatically discover, right? Like, how could I put in, Facebook.com and hit connect and have the client and the server automatically register and do the exchange that they need to do in order for me to connect without knowing what I'm going to connect to before. Because if we consider a future where you have your photos on some service that maybe you run yourself, or maybe that's in your home, or maybe that's something in the cloud that you trust, but you want to be able to go to any website and just say, hey, access my photos, but you don't want to have you don't want them to have to have integrated directly with Facebook or integrated directly with Google Plus. You just want to be able to type in your domain name, aj.dapley.com, hit connect, and then have it be like, here's the thing this server offers. It offers photos, it offers authentication, it offers two-factor authentication, it offers video storage, and then just be able to check the boxes and say accept, and then that service can use whatever it is that I've decided is good for me, which the other thing I'm working on is a home cloud service, and so these two are integrally related. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think there's some parts of that, some of the ideas that do overlap a little bit with OpenID Connect. Not all of it, but there's one thing in particular which that you mentioned was being able to register automatically. And OpenID Connect has it defines a way for clients to dynamically register with the identity provider or with the auth server. And
it's something I'm going to have to look into.
There's also a spec called Webfinger that was kind of experimental, and I don't know if anyone's actually doing anything with this. Probably a very unfortunate name.
Yeah.
Webfinger.
That's wrong.
So yeah. So what it does is, okay. Here's the kind of the use case from a user's perspective. You would go to some website and they say, tell me something about you, and so you give them, say, your email address, and they go and make a Webfinger query. And I could be slightly wrong on some of the details on this because it's been a while since I looked at it, but they would make a Webfinger query and find out what providers are associated with that email address. So then they'd say, hey, do you want to, I see you have accounts with Google, GitHub, Facebook, and WTF.io or whatever. And so which one do you want to sign in with? And so now this site that you're trying to get into has no previous relationship with GitHub, for example, assuming they supported dynamic registration. It could go and dynamically register with GitHub before sending you through the auth flow, which is really kind of cool. It's kind of this idea of discoverable web services as well.
Yeah, I definitely want to see. After the show, I want to connect more about that because that's something I need to get implemented as well, or join forces, or however.
Yeah, I'd love to work on it.
Awesome. So with Anvil, it seems pretty easy to implement, so you don't have to write a lot of that boilerplate over and over again. I mean, if I'm a front-end developer and I'm pretty familiar with Node. I mean, I don't use it to the extent that, I use it with Express and other frameworks. I haven't contributed back to the project or anything, but to my point, I guess, I'm a front-end developer. I understand Node. How hard or easy is it to just get authentication up and running with the JWTs with Anvil?
Well, so you should be able to install Anvil globally and use the CLI to generate a project. The project, you're not really going to write any authentication code. It's there so you can customize it if you want to and keep your changes in version control. Things like the views. So you want to brand that stuff yourself, and it's specific to your project. It doesn't, you don't want to have to fork the entire auth server to make those changes. And so we make it really easy to do that. We generate, we call it a deployment repository, and it's got things like your config files and public-private key pairs and your static assets that would go along with any changes you make to the views, things like that. And Anvil gets pulled in as an npm dependency. There's a package.json file, and we're starting to bundle things that you would need to deploy it very quickly in there as well. So it's more like keeping your configuration management type stuff for your auth server, keeping that under version control. And then you would just deploy it like any other Node thing. Right now, Redis is a dependency, but on the roadmap, we're looking to build the database right into the auth server, use an embedded database. So that's to keep the footprint minimal. I mean, you don't want to have to run 15 nodes to set up your auth server. It's going to be part of a larger ecosystem of stuff, so you want it to have a small footprint.
Here's
yeah.
Another question. Like, let's say that I've already used some passport module and I've kind of got some authentication done, but I want to switch over to Anvil Connect. Like, what does that migration path look like? Can I?
Yeah. So what you would do is just use another passport strategy that integrates with Anvil Connect, and Anvil Connect handles all the other providers. We've also made this really easy to extend. So if there's providers that we don't support, you can wire them up in your deployment repository fairly easily. You don't even have to write a passport strategy for most OAuth 2 or OAuth providers or anything like that. You can also extend it, like if you have some custom LDAP type thing or something like that, you can also use that one library in your deployment repository, integrate with Anvil Connect. You can authenticate any way you want to with Anvil Connect. We provide a bunch of stuff out of the box, but you can use any passport strategy that's out there, or you can write your own, or if it's a well-known protocol like OAuth 2, you don't even have to write a passport strategy. You can just write a JSON file that has some parameters for how that provider deals with OAuth, and that's enough. So to answer your question, it's a matter of replacing whatever passport strategies you're using with one Anvil Connect passport strategy. I think Jared Hansen's Passport OpenID Connect works with this. There are a couple of people using that. And we also have a client library for JavaScript for static apps that don't have a server on the back end. So you shouldn't have to write any auth code in order to set up an auth server. The whole point of it is that you don't have to. It solves all those problems for you.
Okay, so if I already had some sort of integrated strategy, I could start by just firing up an Anvil server and change a couple endpoints over here or there, and eventually, maybe create in the Anvil server the strategy that connects to the thing I was already using, migrate the rest of it over,
assuming, yeah, absolutely,
and then remove my original one at some point in the future when it's convenient.
Yeah, and Anvil's also designed to be like a central repository to keep your user data too. Not necessarily profile data, because everybody does user profiles differently, but user accounts and identity and permissions and things like that get stored directly in Anvil. So if you have another app and you have a database, you don't have to store user data. You can just you can take the identifiers that you get from Anvil Connect and use them as like a user ID field on your other data, but you don't have to store user accounts in your other apps.
So are you familiar with Stormpath at all? Yeah,
absolutely.
Can you talk a little bit about how this is similar or different from that?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. There's just an enormous number of identity as a service providers like Stormpath and Auth0 and others, and those guys are doing really great work, and I don't want to disparage what they're doing at all. Anvil solves the same problem, but it does it with open source software that you run yourself. And the reason that this stuff has to be open source, in my mind, is that users are like your bread and butter. They're the core of your business. Why would you outsource that in such a way that if the company gets acquired or goes away, you could lose that? And these services don't interoperate with each other, so it's not like you could just transfer over your data from one to the other just like that and it works. You have a very complicated migration path if you ever have to stop using one of these things. So the goal of Anvil in being an open source project is that you have business continuity. You're never going to have to worry about the carpet being pulled out from under your feet.
So let's say that I really value paying a few dollars versus learning what I need to set up the server. Is there an Anvil as a service?
Not yet, but that's definitely something I would like to make. The few dollars thing is a really good point too, because if you look at a lot of these identity services and also off-the-shelf software, like Nick can probably tell you about this, like enterprise auth server products are exorbitantly expensive, and also these these identity as a service platforms also tend to be very expensive per user. And somebody just brought up a good point, which is how do they actually use your user info? We had somebody evaluating Anvil a while back that they do a lot of business with the government in the country that they're in, and they wanted to run the auth. It was a requirement that they run the auth server themselves at the time because they didn't want some service like Stormpath, for example, to have their user data. It's just important to keep ownership of that.
Yeah, some of those enterprise ones are so expensive that hiring a person to manage all of the permissions for you is like a small portion of the cost of the thing. it's just staggering that people can pay that.
Yeah, definitely. And also there's the complexity issue when you're talking about enterprise products. They're just insanely hard to set up and keep running. And you know, however complicated our stuff seems, it pales in comparison to using some of these enterprise products. You don't need a team of $300 an hour consultants to help you set this stuff up. I mean, if you understand JSON and HTTP and you can read the docs, and file an issue on GitHub here and there, you can get it going yourself. So
that's awesome. So what if I'm the first person who wants to connect to Anvil Connect in Scheme, for example? How hard is it to write the client piece that does that?
Yeah. So basically, if you understand how OAuth works, you're halfway there. You're gonna have to do some redirects and be able to handle a redirect back from the auth server. You have to know how to make a GET and a POST request, and possibly how to use a couple other general API things like basic authentication for the client.
What are those?
Like that. What's that, Erik?
Even us lowly front-end developers know what GET and what POST and GET are.
I know. I mean, really, the part that's the hardest for people to integrate is actually dealing with the signatures and the JWTs. Not everyone's familiar with that stuff, but really it shouldn't be that hard to get going, especially if there's already an existing library for doing for verifying and decoding these tokens. You should use it because and it's funny you bring I think you said Scheme, but I think somebody did a common Lisp client for this a while back. So
that's awesome.
And there's also tons of clients that are already out there where you probably don't even have to write one.
So a lot of people aren't, like, security has not been the web's strong point. Like when things start, I mean, for those of you that don't know, the way that email worked in the beginning, and it's still not that much better, is that you send a message that has HTTP headers, basically. Those are called MIME headers. And you just put in there who it's to and who it's from, and then a body. So an email is almost identical to a post, right? And there's no authentication. Like, now we've implemented things on top of DNS, and like as long as both servers both agree, they kind of sort of try to figure out and make sure the email's from the right person and put it in your spam box otherwise. But like, the web is just a terrible platform when it comes to security, and it just was never in the forefront of anyone's mind as any standard has ever been developed, pretty much. So when you see things like HMAC and RSA and AES, you freak out because you're like, these are acronyms that I don't know what they mean. But most likely in your language, there's a really simple way to do those kinds of things that you need to do with the tokens. It's just, yeah, it will be a little bit more difficult to follow an example because so few people are focused on security. People are focused on getting their product out the door. They're not focused on what happens when Target and Lowe's and Facebook get breached and leak millions of credit card numbers. You're thinking, how do I get the credit card numbers, a lot sooner most of the time than you're thinking, how do I secure them?
You guys are getting me excited, like, to actually try some of this stuff. Because have you guys ever heard of the Serviceworker project?
Say again?
Serviceworker?
I'm not sure.
So Serviceworker is it's a spec. It's a project. It's implemented in Chrome. It's implemented in Firefox. But I mean, what it really does is it provides really good offline capabilities.
Okay.
And it actually doesn't go through like the main JavaScript thread. You can call things outside of that. So it'd be interesting to see. It can't touch the DOM or anything like that. But it'd be interesting to see kind of like a worker implementation, whether it be service workers or web workers.
Okay.
To kind of circumvent some of that security issues, and they may have their own security issues that I'm not aware of.
So this
but it might be interesting to see something.
This is something where we should like make a part 2 of this and talk about some of that stuff. because we now have web crypto, which is implemented even in Internet Explorer and even in mobile Safari.
Yeah.
And there are some really interesting new possibilities. In line with what you're saying is something I want to tie into OAuth 3 that's already been implemented somewhat by Substack. He calls it, is it Keyboot? I think it's Keyboot. Well, there's just related to this. There's Substack's Keyboot, Scramble.io, and Keybase.io. If the words that were just spoken tickle your fancy, you're going to want to take a look at those 3 sites. But we should talk about that in another episode.
Yeah, I wanted to do a web crypto one a long time back, but I couldn't get anybody from the specs to come on right away, so I kind of abandoned it for a while. But that'd be really good. I'd love to do that.
And on this note, there's one critical area where I'm a little bit worried that if OpenID Connect is going to take hold, there's one thing that I really hope that it doesn't neglect, which isn't currently part of JWT, which is if you want to do peer authentication. So let's consider for a second, take the web away and think of your connectivity as just from one device to another or from one app to another. You see this on your phone because you're opening an app on your phone, not a web page, and you connect with Facebook. And iOS has some of that Facebook integration in, so you can click connect with Facebook, and it can grant a token right there in the app. And I'm not sure if it allows you to do it even if you're offline, but you should be able to do it even if you're offline. And I'm not sure if the JWT really has a way to handle that. With the implementation as I know it, the only way I've been able to think to add that ability to do client-to-client authentication in would break most of the JWT clients that exist right now. But you need to be able to have some sort of secret. So basically you take 2 signatures, one that's from your first-party client. So Facebook.com delivers the Facebook app, right? So that Facebook app delivered by Facebook.com that lives on your device needs to have a way to also sign so that it can pass to another client that lives on your device or in your browser, whatever your device is. And then when that goes back, it could verify both signatures to say the server never actually signed off on this token, but the first-party client that belonged to the user did. Does that make sense?
Yes, indeed.
So we could start to get into some authentication where we don't need the server other than when we're actually accessing a resource. So we don't need it to get a user ID to start building that user profile and that sort of thing. And we don't need it for local access. Say I already have a cached copy of my pictures on my device. I don't need to contact the server to give my cached pictures, which are probably the ones I took most recently or I'm most interested in, but still keep that all-way connection.
And now with I use my phone a lot more to surf now even than my desktop. So, or not my desktop. I keep calling it a desktop, laptop. So I mean that's going to be super important to have that offline capability. That's good stuff. So
one other question related to OpenID Connect: does it force HTTPS?
Yeah, it doesn't force it. I mean, you can implement it without it, but it's definitely a requirement of the spec. So, yeah, I mean, hopefully everybody that's implementing it uses SSL.
And is it default to that? Is that what, like, you have just defaults for that, and then people could override it if they wanted to?
Well, there's the spec, and then there's the implementation. I mean, it's kind of a pain in the butt in development to work with. To work with these things, and also, for example, Node doesn't perform as well as one would like with SSL, and so what we do with Anvil is we run it with HTTP in development just for hacking on it, but then to run it in production, you use a proxy. You put Nginx in front of it, and then that load balances across your cluster. And the performance is tremendously better for SSL that way.
I am going to argue that it is not difficult to do it in development.
Okay.
But I don't have time to defend that right now. But
well, maybe you can submit a PR. I'd actually love that.
okay. Yeah. Well, we'll talk afterwards anyway.
Yeah.
I would love to help you get that in there because it is not difficult. It's just not well known. It's the same problem with JWT. People don't see HMAC. They don't understand it. People don't use the OpenSSL command line very often. They don't understand it. But it's not a difficult thing to do. It's just not well known and therefore not widely implemented.
All right, we're hitting close to time. So is there anything else that's important that we should really talk about with this so that developers can get a better handle on it?
Well, if anybody's interested, we have weekly Google Hangouts that are open to the public for Anvil Connect, and you can show up and talk to us and vent and tell us your frustrations and what we're doing wrong. And we also chat on Gitter. You can find more about the project on GitHub. The organization name is Anvil Research, and the repo is called Connect. And we're also at anvil.io.
Excellent. All right, so if anybody wants to find you, learn more about Anvil, obviously they can go to the Gitter, and we'll put that in the show notes. Is there anything like should people just start submitting PRs? Go to
well, we do have a roadmap of stuff that we're working on that's part of the README, and so you can see what we're thinking about. I would try to discuss stuff unless it's a bug fix. If you're thinking about a new big feature, I think it would be really good for us to talk through stuff and make sure that we're on the same page. And also, we're trying to implement a review process for code that comes into the repo to make sure that nothing bad kind of gets folded in. So yeah, it's probably a good idea to chat before you start submitting pull requests, but unless it's a simple thing like a bug fix.
Awesome. And what's your Twitter handle, and how can people find you?
Yeah, I'm Anvil Hacks on Twitter, and my email is smith@anvil.io. So send me your hate mail.
Nice. AJ and Nick, do you have any?
What was that?
I think we lost him.
Hello? Am I back? Nobody can hear me. I'm gone. Oh.
I can. Can anyone hear me?
I hear you.
Okay, yeah, I think we just lost Erik.
There he is.
All right, all right, all right.
So what did you say? Because you cut out. You said AJ.
I said anything that you guys want to add, where people can find you. I know I really like the OAuth 3 stuff on our show notes, so people can find that. Your project, I think we had in the show notes for episode 43. I forgot the name, I'm sorry.
So there's OAuth3.org, and then dapply.com is kind of the landing page for the home cloud, but there's not much code. There's no links to code there yet. It's just a landing page to give me your email address. But I'm cool aj86 everywhere. If you find someone else that is a cool aj86, they're in violation of my trademark, and I'd like you to report them and prosecute them to the full extent of the law, please.
You should build an app for that.
Oh no, that would not really. But yeah, so I'm cool aj86 on anything. So if you want to hit me up or beat me up or fly me out to San Francisco so we can have a burger together, yeah, that's how you do it.
Or get you to DJ a party.
Oh yeah. I also DJ. I am a legitimate DJ. Not for raves, but for like weddings and proms and that kind of thing.
All right. And Nick, any last words on anything here?
No, I'm really excited about all this stuff. I think it's going in an awesome direction, and yeah, and you can find me online at nrn.io.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, guys. I think we're out of time, so we'll catch everybody next week.